February 1879, Oscar Wilde moved to London, determined to sell himself as a professor of aesthetics. He moved in with a friend, Frank Miles, a well-known and well-connected portrait painter. And it was through Miles that the 25-year-old Wilde made contact with the highest rung of London's social ladder. He befriended the painter James McNeill Whistler and actress Lily Langtry, courted actress Ellen Terry with sonnets, and threw white lilies at the feet of leading lady Sarah Bernhardt.
Partly because of the aesthetic business, he becomes very well known. The famous moment is one Englishman turns to another and says, "There goes that bloody fool Oscar Wilde." And Oscar turns to his friend and says, "It's extraordinary how quickly one becomes known in London." He was using the fact that people were calling him a bloody fool in order to go forward.
To get into the best society nowadays, one has to either feed people, amuse people, or shock people. That is all. A man who can dominate a London dinner table can dominate the world.
When we all try and imagine what an evening with Oscar would have been like, it's rather maddening because very many of the accounts we have of what it was like simply say that they can't tell you what it was like, but that he somehow managed to dominate and devastate and hypnotize and captivate every dinner table, every circle he was in, and that he was always doing it.
People all over London were talking about him. Even the Prince of Wales declared, "Not to know Mr. Wilde is not to be known." But not everyone was charmed. "What has he done, this young man, that one meets him everywhere?" asked Polish actress Helen Modjeska. "Oh yes, he talks well, but what has he done?" So in 1880, Oscar did do something. He wrote his first play, Vera or the Nihilists, but he couldn't get it produced. A year later, he self-published a book of 61 poems. While some enjoyed it, many criticized the work as thoroughly unoriginal. Oscar wasn't discouraged, as he would later write,
There is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about.
I think Oscar definitely had it figured out that celebrity should come first, rather than celebrity being the end of years of work.
Punch magazine, one of the most popular in Britain, had a field day with Oscar, mocking his tepid poems. "Aesthete of aesthetes," they wrote, "what's in a name? The poet is wild, but his poetry's tame." Then the sincerest form of flattery, satire. Gilbert and Sullivan's newest operetta, Patience, lampooned the aesthetic movement and was a great hit in England. When the show went to the U.S., producers hired Oscar Wilde to lecture Americans on aesthetics. At only 27, he boarded the SS Arizona and sailed for America. In January 1882, he arrived in New York City, where a customs official asked him if he had anything to declare.
The only thing I have to declare is my genius.
America was largely unprepared for what they were going to see. I think they expected a sort of limp-wristed, rather dandified young man, and they didn't expect a 6'2", well-built Irishman in a very large fur coat who was going to lecture them on the English Renaissance in art.
Most found Wilde's cloak and knee breeches more interesting than what he had to say. The New York Times called his lectures boring, monotonous, and wearisome. But after a few rewrites, Wilde was a hit.
He was preaching the idea of beauty in house adornment, way of life, in furnishings and so forth. And he traveled all over the United States using the satire on himself as a means of evangelizing his aesthetic gospel. That's good salesmanship.
My dear Norman, great success here. Nothing like it since Dickens, they tell me. I'm torn in bits by society. Immense receptions, wonderful dinners, crowds wait for my carriage. I wave a gloved hand and an ivory cane and they cheer. I have 2 secretaries, one to write my autograph, another whose hair is brown, to send locks of his own hair to the young ladies who write asking for mine. He is rapidly becoming bald. My dear Mrs. Beer, I don't know where I am, but I am among canyons and coyotes. One is a sort of fox, the other a deep ravine. I don't know which is which, but it does not really matter in the West. They have such a strong objection to literature that they always use different words for the same object every day.
He drinks drink for drink with the miners and smokes cigarette for cigarette with them and more or less drinks them under the table. And they respect him enormously for it.
Oscar Wilde may have come to America to teach the country about aesthetics, but America taught him something as well.
He had an enormous admiration for America because essentially it swept away all the hypocrisy which was so prevalent in English society at the time. You just got on with what you wanted to get on with. Ambition was accepted, you made your way to the top of the social pile, and you did it in the best way you could, and you know, if it meant trampling on other people, you did it.
It was a lesson that Wilde took back to Europe with him when he left in December of 1882. His year-long visit to America had given him legitimacy as an artist and pockets full of money.
That was a wonderful thing for him because he was just sort of a man about town who had self-published a book of poems that had not been well received. And once he came back from America, I mean, he was an international figure. He was what he had set out to be, a celebrity.